doing, only to the extent that tomorrow we'll talk about bistable systems and oscillatory systems, if that's what you meant. I'm not going to cover feed-forward networks. 'Cause we might not, depending on the time, we might not. Is that what you meant?
You got a thumbs up, so I think so.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see what time we have. I do have a bunch of slides on feed-forward networks, but we're definitely doing different ways of getting bistability and different ways of getting oscillators. Okay. Okay.
The other question that just came in, I would say yes. Like that is sort of the topic of the workshop is basically like, yeah, how to do this from scratch. Also how to use other people's models and build on them or analyze them or something. Um, I would say you don't need to be super well versed in mathematics, but you do need to, like Herbert said, like the rate rules are really important. So if someone tells you what the rate rules are, then you're good to go. And if not, then you might need to understand your system a little bit better to figure out what rate rule is appropriate for the thing you are studying.
Yeah, and in terms of the mathematics, I mean, you just need to know basic, appreciate calculus 101. I mean, you don't need to know much at all. You just need to understand the idea of a rate of change, and that's it. I mean, the software will take care of the rest. So, um, I mean, you can really go to town, of course, in the mathematics. I mean, you can put in a lot of linear algebra, right, into this area too, but we won't go near that. But there's a lot of work you can do with linear algebra. So it depends on how far you want to go, really.
Yeah. Someone asks about transcriptomic using this modeling on transcriptomic data or
Yeah,
multi-scale data.
yeah, that's
Um,
an interesting question.
yeah,
Do you want to try Lucian first, and I'll give it a
I would
go?
say less so, but if you're creative enough, sure. Like I don't know. If you can, these things, this type of modeling describes processes. So if you can describe anything in terms of a process, um, then the answer is yes. And if you can simplify things in anything that if you can summarize anything that can't be a process as a single equation or something, then you can do that also. Like think if something's happening really fast, SVML does have officially fast reactions or something. We don't really do that, but if you can, but basically you just sort of set that as a true statement, like this is always true. It's fast if you sort of assume equilibrium, it's run to steady state automatically. Um, I say it's an open area of research trying to do multi-scale modeling well and fast. It's easier to know what you should do than it is to figure out an actual computer program that will do it relatively quickly enough. Uh, I would say some people like are the Roadrunner tends to get used in pieces of larger systems sometimes for people that are doing multi-scale things. We have one user who's modeling a liver and modeling each cell of the liver, and in each cell of the liver he has an instance of Roadrunner running and like doing his calculations, and then he in Python has each cell communicating with its neighbors when things are produced and excreted and stuff. That's sort of I think he has like 10,000 instances of Roadrunner running. That's an extreme example, but that sort of thing can be done, I guess.
The other thing I can say about you mentioned transcriptomic data. There's in the last 24 years, really, people have struggled to marry the omic type data, right? That gets generated a lot with systems biology and mechanistic modeling. It's really hard, and it hasn't been too successful. Often, the kind of modeling we do requires much more specific kinds of data. Like we've been building a fairly good, I think it's one of the best signaling networks of EGF. And yeah, we have some omic data, basically proteomic data that gives us time courses, but we also rely heavily on knowing kinds of biophysics that underlies protein binding and unbinding, and knowing the kinds of ranges of the rate constants you might have, and going to the literature and looking for people who've actually measured these rate constants. And that's nothing to do with, high throughput data. That's just somebody who took a detailed look at a particular system and, measured certain things. So combining omic data and mechanistic data has always been difficult. So um, it's hard, but you, it's possible though.
Yeah.
Scientific machine learning, yeah, there's a place for it, but what I don't want to happen is we end up with models that nobody understands because they're just machine learned. And
Yeah, I would say the issue with
uh,
machine learning is like if you give it data, you can like reproduce that data and maybe you can make some accurate predictions, but you don't know why
yeah,
you're it's working, and you don't know necessarily like under what conditions it works and whether it can be extended or not. It's good for interpolating the bits you haven't seen, but it's not necessarily good for extrapolating beyond where you had data originally.
I mean, there's a
And
there's a tension here though as well because
yeah,
machine learning is much easier to do
right.
for modeling, right? You just get the data, get the right machine learning algorithm, train, done. Now, that can be done quite quickly. And if this is, say, a cancer problem, now you're trying to find a new target for drug cancer therapy. At that point, nobody really cares whether you understand it or not, because you're just after a therapy that'll work, that'll cure a patient. And so there's this tension between getting things done so that you can, help somebody in a clinic, but also on the scientific side of saying, well, why does it work then? Why is the patient cured of cancer using this new therapy? And so there's a tension between the two, and that's
And a potential
ongoing.
collaboration between the two, right? You can like you save your patient, and then you have like a
Yeah.
new question to ask of
Yes.
the more detailed modelers. Like you don't know, but you could find out, and this is apparently something useful to find out.
Right. As long as it's useful, then somebody will pay for it to be done. Yes.
Right? How useful
Um,
is the question? Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, topological modeling versus dynamic modeling. So by topological modeling, you mean something like just looking at the network structure and seeing what that can tell you versus sort of,
Oh
time
yeah.
course simulation. I assume that's what it is. We won't be doing topological modeling this week, but that is a large area. Uh, Tellurium does have a bunch of, it actually has a separate bit of code that's dedicated to topological analysis. Um, and if people are, I mean, I'm interested in that kind of thing, and which is why it's there. So it's possible to do some topological modeling, yeah, but we don't support things like constraint-based modeling, flux balance modeling. There are other tools that can do that much better. Do you need antimony? No, but it does make life much, much simpler.
And for this, like if you install Tellurium, you have it comes with antimony. So
It's data-driven, knowledge-driven
yeah.
approach. Yeah, that's true. That is true. There is a new an angle coming from the physicists because they are not happy with the idea that you give this to a machine learn algorithm and that's it. You don't know anything about what's going on. You're right. They're trying to repurpose particular strategies in machine learning to try to bring back, mechanistic understanding. You're right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and
Okay.
share my screen here. So,
Is there any way to make
um,
it bigger?
yes, I
Because
could
mine
make
might have been
my
small as well.
bulk there.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that good?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this is again materials day one. This is the antimony demo. The it's not very informative. The whole point of this is for me to change it as I go. The final version will be saved after I'm done. So as I've been talking to a few people through on the chat. If you run this, pip install Tellurium, -q just means it's quiet. It will install Tellurium in the Colab environment. So this is just a Colab file. That's an IPython notebook here. So it goes through and installs everything. But the trick is that afterwards you can't just run things and have Tellurium work. And there's the technical reason behind it is because it updates NumPy, and when something gets changed in the Colab environment, it needs to be restarted, because otherwise it sort of has the back end of the new version, but the front end of the old version, which is usually incompatible. So if I were to try to run this at this point, I get the error that a lot of you have mentioned, like, oh, there's a problem. There's like this NumPy problem has no, and that's because NumPy was updated and you get the different front end and back end. So you go to runtime, restart session. You can also do control M, apparently, control M period. Yes, I'll restart the runtime. And now if I run this, it will work. So that's how you get Tellurium to work on Colab. So it's this pip install Tellurium, quiet if you don't want it to spam you with a bunch of stuff, and then import Tellurium should work. So this is a basic script. We are going to load a model and then do the default simulation and the default plot of that model. So as Herbert indicated, we're talking about reactions here and processes. So we have S1 that goes to S2 at this rate. So this is what a reaction looks like in Tellurium. You get the arrow in the middle, you get your reactants on the left, your products on the right, the rate law after semicolon on the right. And then S2 goes to S3 at another rate. And again, as Herbert mentioned, we're doing the mass action thing. So K1 times S1, K2 times S2. We'll then initialize our values. We'll say S1 starts at 5, S2 and S3 start at 0. And then we'll give some numbers to K1 and K2 here, which I made up out of nothing. And then we'll simulate and plot it, which then creates this. So as you see, the default simulation is for 5 seconds or 5 time units. It sort of assumes they're seconds if you don't say anything else. We see S1 starts off at 5 and then gets consumed. You can see it's because S1 is the rate at which it is consumed is proportional to K1 and itself. So as it goes closer and closer to 0, it gets slower and slower. But like if you were to run it out to infinity, it would eventually go to complete 0. As S2 here goes up and then starts coming back down, that's because at the beginning, it's being created really quickly. And then eventually, because it's being converted to S3 at a rate of its own concentration, it starts off converting to S3 very slowly. And here's S3 very slowly starting to go up. But eventually, S1 starts to go down fast enough that the S2 to S3 conversion overtakes it. And now S2 starts to go down and S3 starts to go up. And if we were to run this longer, from 0 to 20, say, we would see that over time, everything is being converted to S3. Everything that S3 is going to 5, S1 went to 0, and S2 was only a transitory species and then went back down to 0 again. This sort of end state is the steady state that Herbert mentioned earlier. So that's a basic antimony. So antimony is the syntax that you use to define your model here with the load A or load antimony function that is part of Tellurium. And I've imported it as TE, so I don't have to write tellurium.t. But if I didn't have this part, I could write tellurium.load A instead. So that's your basics. Different models will have different features, and antimony and SBML. Actually, let me talk a little bit about SBML first before I talk about anything else. Let's put a new code thing. So now I have this RR object, and I can get antimony to just see my model. Print it because it doesn't look nice there. And that is sort of the automatic translation of that. So it's a little bit more, it gives you a little bit more detail when it generates antimony from it. But you can also get the SPML, and this will be unreadable. I mean, it's not technically unreadable. There are things here that you can eventually decipher, but it's not something that you're supposed to be looking at. This is a format that's designed to be read by computers and not necessarily by people. If a person here is looking at it, you can be like, oh, yeah, okay, here's my S1, S2, S3, and here's my 500, and here's my K1, K2, and my reactions have this complicated thing, but I could maybe figure them out. So all of that information is designed to be read by a computer so that Tellurium could import it. Some other SPML reading program could also import it, or anything else. And that, like, if in the future, if I make my model, I export it as SPML, I save it, then in like 10 years, we've lost all our funding. Tellurium's gone. It only works on old versions of Python, but someone else has come along and has a new program that takes in SPML models. You can then import that SPML model and run it today. And that has literally happened because SPML has been around for 15, 20 years. And models that were created with SPML 20 years ago are still readable and runnable and expandable by modern computers, which is not true of 20-year-old programs necessarily that were written in whatever was popular 20 years ago. So it's not useful to read, but it's useful to it's useful for longevity and exchangeability and stuff like that. Someone asked with variables of discrete. There is there's
I can answer that if you want. I
yeah,
can
go
type
ahead.
it in. We don't do what do they call them? Recurrent? Is it recursive equations? We have dx n plus 1 by delta t equals something. We don't support those. We only support stochastic models using the Gillespie algorithm, where now you're dealing with transitions of specific molecules. So you'd model something that maybe only has 10 molecules. That's the only discrete support we have. I think I know what you mean by maps. We don't do maps. I don't even think SPML supports maps actually either. Although one could make it, I guess, if you needed to. But yeah, we don't. I mean, those kinds of things you find in sometimes anyway in predator-prey models where they do discrete type models. But yeah, we don't.
I was hoping I could do something here, but oh, there. All right. Great. All right. We mentioned reversible reactions. Let's say that we want to say that in addition to S1 forming S2, S2 will also convert to S1. So we just say that minus K3 times S2, if we're doing mass action again, and K4 times S3. So now we need to define those new constants. 9, I don't know. And we can run that and see what happens. So now we're reaching a different steady state. Here, let's simulate this for 20, should probably work. Yeah. So as it happens, we started off with a level of 5, and now S2 is, instead of being just a transitory thing, it is actually sort of the dominant species in this set of reactions. So because S2 could form S1 and S3 could form S2, And because K4 was higher than anything else and K3 was kind of low, um, not a lot of S2 is going back to S2, S1, but a fair amount of S3 is going back to S2. So this is our new sort of steady state with that. So, and you can have any arbitrary math you want here. You could, I'm just going to make a new version of this to completely, we can say, I don't know, K1, this one squared minus the sine of time or something, like something silly, and then see what happens. Oh, it doesn't like it. Oh, so if you get a runtime error, that means that it was too complicated, and the simulator, the back end, like couldn't figure things out. So there we go. So now if we have just this, but the reverse is like, according to the sign of time, sometimes S2 goes back to S1, then you end up with this, which is not a steady state at all. And it's a very odd model. But it just serves to demonstrate that you can put any arbitrary equations you like in here.
By the way,
Let's see.
by the way, let me
Yeah.
let me add to that error you had. So that
Huh?
error, that's it mainly because the model was bad. It was not a
Right.
sort of Tellurium problem. It's just that you entered a model that just wasn't very sensible. Not that Lucian isn't very sensible. He's a very
No,
sensible
like
young
I
man.
made up a dumb
Uh,
model, and it was too
yeah,
dumb for Roadrunner to. This was also a dumb model, but it was like not quite dumb enough for it to not know what to do with it.
yeah.
Basically the mathematics got too involved and behind the scenes, and it couldn't figure out exactly what was going
But
on.
you'll find that any simulator will have the same problem with that model.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's a badly constructed model. That's the issue.
Right, right.
So
Someone asks if it's possible to have automation of parameters input variable ranges. That sort of parameter estimation, I think, is what the question is about there. And parameter estimation is a separate difficult task, and it can be done. We're not going to cover it a lot here, but we will cover. One of our speakers on Friday has a parameter estimation tool that we'll be talking about called, I don't remember what it's called now. It's by something PETAB. It uses PETAB. Anyway, yes. Time is indeed a variable that is always present in Tellurium. Go ahead, Herbert.
Pipette is called Pipesto. Yeah.
Pipesto, that's right. Initial conditions of the concentration of molecules, A, type A changes over time, type B. Yes, all of these things can be, and parameters can be selected from distribution. You can actually do that. Let's see here. So
Let me give some examples of the
sure, let's do that.
initial conditions are dynamic.
I'm not quite sure what oops.
Yeah, what do you
I'm
mean
not sure
you
what condition.
provide initial conditions are dynamic? Do you mean the initial conditions change as well? Or do you mean the inputs change over time? Like different values for S1. I mean, you can have S1 can be a function. He's got S1 that equals 5. That
Right.
can be a function.
I could
Um,
say,
I mean,
oh, you want
it
to
could
talk
be
about
like,
like S1? Like, oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it could be K1 plus K2. I mean, something crazy like
Right.
that.
So I think it's important to say here. So how S1 changes in time is completely defined by our reaction set here, right? So S1, if S1 is a species and it is in a set of reactions, then how S1 changes in time is defined by those reactions and is not defined elsewhere. If I want S1 to be the change in S1 to be defined elsewhere, I have to declare that S1 is a boundary species, which I can do with this. And if I just do this, then you will see that it doesn't want me to show me S1 because it knows that it's always 5. But S2 and S3 then go up, and will actually continue to go up. There is no steady state for this because there is a steady state. Why is there a steady state?
There'll be a steady state.
Okay. even if S1's
Hold
fixed.
on, you're right. No, it's because it's reversible. It's because it's reversible.
Oh, it's because it's reversible, right?
Yeah,
Okay, right. I was forgetting which version I have.
yeah,
If I
that
have
one will go.
this,
Yeah, that will go
this
crazy.
one would go up infinitely, right?
But just to go back to initial conditions are dynamic.
Yeah. So I can set up. Let's see.
I mean,
Like
that could be a function of time. Yeah, the
the
question
time
has
is
many
zero
possible.
at the initial condition, right? Yeah.
I mean, the question has many possible answers. It depends on what you're
Right.
actually asking. I mean, you can set the value at time zero, right? You can do that. You can control our S1 changes over time, not just at time zero. And you can do what Lucian's doing here. You can set S1 to come from a normal distribution at time zero. So it depends on exactly what you want S1 to do.
So here, someone asked about distribution. So here's a distribution. So you have a normal distribution. The mean is at 5 and the standard deviation is 2. Here it picked a value of around 2.2 or so when it started. If I run this again, it'll be different. Now it's 5. If I ran it again, now it's a little over 3. Over 5, over 5, a little over 3, over 5. It's coming up with some very similar numbers here. Oh, here, now we're up above 10. Um, so then like each simulation would be a different simulation based on like how S1 started. And we could do that for the other ones also. You could say a uniform between 3 and 7 or something, right?
So remember, these are the values at time zero.
At time zero only, right? How
The
it
model
changes
will
in time is
do,
just here,
yeah, after that, the model will do whatever it wants to do with them.
right?
But at time, these are at time zero.
So yeah,
Um,
so here's one where at time zero, it picked a value of 6 for S1 and it picked a value of 4.9 for S2. And then it changed in time according to our reaction network. Let's see here.
I'm just answering some of the questions.
Sure.
Um, can parameters be selected from a distribution? Yes, K1 and K2, K2 could also be from a distribution as
Right.
well.
Yeah, sure. You could say,
Can we plot S1 and S2 on our axis instead of time? Yes, you can do that as well. In fact, I'll be showing that later on, okay? So a lot
okay.
of these questions will be answered in the next session, but yes, you
Yeah.
can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you
Someone
can
asked if
plot
S1 or
multiple.
S2 or
Go
go
on.
ahead, finish up your thought there.
You want to plot multiple models with different initial conditions? Yes, they said, can you use a loop? Yes, you would do a loop.
Yeah.
I can show you that later on as well if you want. That's pretty straightforward. Um,
Sure. In fact, here.
Somebody asks about a data frame. You can move all this data into a pandas data frame. I'll show you how to do that as well later on this morning. Are S1 and S2 complexes or different species? That's entirely up to you how you want to interpret that. S1 could be a complex and S2 another complex. S2 could be a metabolite like glucose. S2 could be another metabolite like glucose 6 phosphate. That's entirely up to you how you interpret what those are.
Yeah.
Um, is it possible to have an automation of parameter input variable ranges in the simulation? Uh,
Oh, so you like, so yes, if someone wants a range of values for S1 and you want
yeah.
to say, and look what happens to S2. So yes, sure, let's do that. So let's have we're looping over a range and we'll say RR dot S1 equals X, right?
Okay.
And then we'll simulate and plot it and we'll look at that for 5 different values of X, including 0, we will set S1 to that value and then simulate and plot, right? So repeat. Oh, when I set S2, yeah, here, I will change this back to this. So here's our normal version, except that we're overwriting it. We're overwriting S1 each time now. All right. So at the beginning, if S1 is 0, nothing happens because there's nothing to convert. And then here our first one, S1 starts at 1. Everything goes up and down as you expect. And now that looks odd. Oh, okay. I forgot to here.
Got the reset.
Yeah, I forgot my reset. So that's something important to. So actually, that's really important here. So S1, I said S1 was 0, and then I said S1 was 1, and it did a thing. Then I said S1 was 2, and why are S2 and S3 not back down at 0? That's because if I call simulate multiple times, it will pick up from the second simulate will pick up from where the first one left off. So I'm gonna
So
let's
after this, Lucian,
yeah.
somebody suggested, can we continue with the basic antimony and then
Yeah,
do this
that's
more
fine.
advanced stuff later? Yeah, I think that's
Sure.
a good idea. So
Um,
I'll have an entire session after this on more advanced topics.
yeah,
So don't worry, we'll cover a lot of these questions then as well.
yeah. So if I say simulate plot, it simulates first for 5 seconds, and then it picks up from where it ended and continues on doing another one. So if I want to not do that, I just need to instead say reset my model, and then it will do something different each time. So here it starts at 0. When it's 1, it does that. When it's 2, it does this. 3, it does this. 4, and that was the other thing. Those are the 5 things.
Yeah,
All right.
we'll do some more tricks like this
Yeah.
in the next session. But yeah, so
Yep. Okay.
let's go back to the basic stuff then.
Right. So the basics. Another thing is assignment rules. So assignment rules are when you want to define an element of your model that will always that is defined by an equation and is not you want to define it by math and you don't want to define how it changes in time. So let's say I want S total to always equal, that's colon equals S1 plus S2 plus S3, right? So that's the total value of S in my model. So now it's not actually, okay. And then I have to declare, if I wanted to get it to show, I have to tell Antimony that it's a species by default. I could get it out there and otherwise, oh, it's still not. Okay, fine. Selections. 1, 2, 3, and S. Sometimes it gets picky about these sorts of things. I don't know why S1 isn't. Why S1? I told. Oh, right. There. Someone asked how you plot S1 versus S2. That's how. There, finally, gracious. Okay, so we have. So now we defined an assignment rule here. S total is always equal to S1 plus S2 plus S3. And as you might expect, it is always 5 because these things are converting between each other and nothing is being lost. You can do that. Again, this was a useful equation, but it can be any arbitrary math again. Rate rules, and you saw this briefly in Herbert's example. But if I want to say that something changes in time, I can just say species x prime, the rate of change of x equals 3. I don't know. So now I have x that is just changing linearly in time and not being affected by anything else. if I were to say that x prime equals k1 times s1, then that will change exactly the same as s1 changes. And since x, and if I say x equals 10, just so, or 6, so it starts off slightly differently, you'll be able to see, oh, okay. Oh, right, because it increases it as one. So minus, that would be the same as S1. Then x is changing exactly the same way that S1 is changing, because I told it that the rate of change of x1 is this equation. So with those three basic things are different ways to have model elements change in time. You have your reaction, your set of reactions, you have assignment rules, and you have rate rules. You can completely replicate a set of reactions with a set of rate rules that are just like Herbert was talking about earlier, when your basic dxdt, dsdt, and stuff. Putting them in reactions makes it easier. The only reason to do that is because it makes it easier to comprehend, and because some of the topological analyses can then be done. And it's sometimes just easier to comprehend. You understand what is going on at a more fundamental level if you have a system of reactions than if you have a system of dxdts. But that doesn't mean that this isn't useful in some conditions. Sometimes sometimes something isn't changing via a process, it's just changing in time, and there's an equation you have for it, and you can just stick it in if you need to. I don't think I'll do functions. In the latest version of functions, we took out that. We're at 11. Should I
Yeah.
stop there? Is that all you need, Herbert, for your bit?
That's actually that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's probably good. There are other
Yeah.
things in antimony that you can do. There are events, there's compartments and stuff, and I can cover some of that tomorrow if you want to take some time to do more
Yeah,
advanced
yeah, we can
things.
do more
But
advanced stuff. Yeah, so events, somebody had a question about that. We can do that tomorrow if you
sure, look,
want.
you want me to do a quick event right now?
Yeah, I'll do a quick event now then.
I'll do a quick event right now here. Oh, there's my distributions. So how about so the main word is at in antimony. So at time is greater than 3. We're going to set S1 back to 5. Bonk, there it is. So it was being consumed. After 3 seconds, we put a bunch of S1 back in our solution, and then the reaction thing changed. I can also I don't have to make, this again can be arbitrary math. I can say when S1 is less than 2.5 or something, then we reset it to 5. And so then every time it gets down to 2.5, we reset it to 5, and then it gets consumed, and then it gets down to 2.5 and is reset each time like that. So that's your basic eventing system there. Is that good?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And
So we
I'm
can have a
happy to.
break. Oh yeah, there's any question? Yeah, let's have any questions now then,
Sure, yeah.
5
Any
minutes.
questions or?
Then we'll have a break then for 10 minutes. So any
Mhm.
questions, we can tell you, uh, we'll perhaps wait for a full answer until the next session, but I'll note it down though. Okay, that
Yeah.
they were the questions asked to be asked. So Kimberly just noticed, Kimberly just put up the a link to the antimony syntax, which is
Docs,
nice.
yeah.
Um, but I think tomorrow, is it? Is it tomorrow you'll be doing some more advanced antimony
Yeah,
stuff?
that was.
Yeah.
I don't know if we planned specifically when I'm doing that, but I'm happy to do that
No, I know,
whenever.
yeah. When my voice runs out.
My voice is like, I need to go get some water. Lucian, take it over.
Exactly.
Tell them all my
I think
crazy
like
things.
piecewise and stuff like that, and maybe
Yeah,
more on the distributions and
yeah,
maybe
sure.
more advanced event stuff. Um, yeah, otherwise we can have a 10-minute break and then we'll start up again. Um, so I have a bunch of examples to show you.
Are you staying during the break to continue to talk like you did the last time or not?
I can, yeah, I'll be here.
And
At different ways
see.
the OD definition change. The tutorial is defined as S1 to S2, then as X prime. Yeah, so S1 to S2 is defining rates of change in terms of reactions or processes. S1, and you understand that as S1 decreases, S2 increases. And as opposed to X prime, which is just this is how things change in time. So if I say S1 prime equals
No,
K2
you're not
time,
sharing.
I was just well, I was typing it into chat, but I can share
Oh, right.
again for
Okay,
sure.
go on then. That's fine.
Yes.
I didn't know
Yeah,
you were doing
I'll
chat.
share again. That makes sense. Probably makes more sense.
By the way, you can't mix the prime notation and the reactions. That's
Right.
one thing you should mention. Like that, you can't do that.
Right. I have to. And S2 prime equals K1 times S1 minus K2 times S2, and S3 prime equals
So what he's doing there, that he's
K2
writing what
times
the
S2.
equivalent, that is
Right.
equivalent to the two reactions above.
Right. We'll take this out again. So this and this are two ways of saying the same thing. And we just think that this is a little bit more comprehensible and that I don't know, it makes sense, and it also affords other new types of analysis that you don't have with this system. You can ask about like stoichiometry matrices or eigenvalues and other fun things.
The
I
other thing is
Yeah.
we have drawing tools as well that will, given the first two lines there, 3 and 4,
Mm-hmm.
will draw that as a network. Whereas you
Right.
can't draw lines 6, 7, 8. They're just
Right.
equations.
So if I were to do this, it would complain because species quantity cannot be determined simultaneously by reactions and rules. So one thing I could do, and actually I've seen that SBMO model like this, it's like, here's my reaction, but everything is fixed, and or everything is a boundary species. And when something is a boundary species, you can define it changing in time like this way. Um, and there we go. We have exactly the same things we had before.
That's really weird. But anyway,
It is, yeah. I mean, more clearly, I would just delete those
yeah,
and
yeah.
go from that.
So any of you
Uh,
know, if any of you are into chaotic models like the Lorentz attractor and the Rosler and so on, this is a really quick way of solving, and they only come in the form of differential equations. This is a quick way of solving differential equations. Um, and that's what
right.
I actually end up using this because I can't remember the Python syntax in SciPy for solving differential equations. And I will just write the differential equations literally in Antimony and it'll just solve them for me. Um, yeah, so if you're into physics models that only come as differential equations, this is a quick way that you can use to solve them.
Someone asked how
Sorry,
I'd arrived at
David.
line 3 through 4. Um,
Yes, that's me.
okay, so I was going to say it's just one way is that I know what is going on. I know S1 is being converted into S2, and so I will just write that as line 3, and I know that S2 is being converted to S3. If I was given this and asked to produce this, you can like work it out. You can be like, okay, wait, let's look at these terms. And are there like terms somewhere? And we have, we have a negative K1 and a positive K1 times S1. That thing seems the same. So I bet what's happening is that S1 is being consumed at the same time as S2 is being produced. And similarly, here's like terms again. We have negative this and positive that. So I bet S2 is being converted to S3. But it takes some like detective work basically. So when I ask about reversibility, how is it defined? It is just defined entirely by this reaction, by this math, right? Either the math is reversible or it is not, and whatever I write there will determine whether it's reversible. So when I change this to this minus K3 times S2, that is reversible because that's the way the math works out, and because I know that I am making an S2 to S1 conversion here. Yeah.
Yeah, the reversibility comes entirely from the rate law. Okay.
entirely from the rate law. This whatever
And
this
the
math is.
reaction
Yeah.
just determines the stoichiometries, essentially.
Do we have options for what integrator is used when solving equations in the backend? We do have somewhat. There are options for that. That's definitely an advanced topic, but the answer is yes. The one we use is probably the only one you'll. The default one is the best one that we've found, and the one we've put the most effort into making usable. You can use some old like the other ones we have tend to be more sort of demonstration type things. Like we'll have, I don't remember what the other integrators are, but it's CVODE in the background is the system, and technically, Roadrunner was made to be. Oh, I didn't even tell you about Roadrunner. Roadrunner is the simulator under the hood of Tellurium and Antimony that is actually running the actual equations. And what Roadrunner does is it takes the system of equations, it converts them into machine code, and runs that program. So it's fast because it doesn't rely on Python in the slightest. It is about as fast as you're ever going to get it. Um,
I'll just
so
add to the solver. So yeah, we do use CVODE. This comes from the
mm-hmm.
Sundials library set.
Yeah,
There are a couple of others like Euler and RK Runge Cutter, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
wouldn't bother using those. Um, but the CVODE solver has a lot of options, which is an advanced topic. You can change a lot of things in it. Um, so it's pretty versatile and it'll probably, well, I would say it'll cope with anything you give it. Now, if you get something like a convergence error or something, that's almost always due to a bad model, not a bad integrator. Okay. The Cplex solver, isn't that a linear programming solver? I think it is, in which case, I would, if you want to do linear programming, I would switch to something like Cobra Pi, which specializes in that kind of modeling. Oh yeah, stuck with the math. Yeah, what does S1 prime mean, Lucian?
So S1 prime is the rate of change of S1 in time. So it's ds1 over dt if in other math terms,
Can you type it
basically.
in a comment? Type it in a comment in
Sure.
line 6. Yeah, it's literally just a rate of change. It means rate of change.
Yeah.
It's basically he's writing the differential equations themselves, which is why I said if you have a model that only has differential equations, like the Lorentz model or some fancy model, this lets you type those in as well directly.
Yeah, we do have some basic and advanced. Some of you are clearly
I
modelers, and
know.
others of you are not. Don't worry if there are questions that I may let it that you don't understand, and feel free to ask your basic questions also. Like if people ask an advanced question, don't think that that's like the only type of question we'll answer. If you're like, I just need you to tell me what an assignment rule is again, I'm happy to tell you what an assignment rule is again.
But by the way, I'll be starting from scratch again in the next
Yeah,
session.
in the next session
So
too.
yeah, I'm not going to be starting at the advanced level. I'll from
There's
scratch, okay?
yeah,
So I guess actually I guess we could start the next session. When did we stop?
sure.
Okay.
So
I guess
the
it's about time. Yeah, go
yeah.
on.
So just like what are assignment rules and what are rate rules? So the basic things again here. An assignment rule is assigning a an equation to a value and is saying like over all time s total is always equal to s2 plus s2 s1 plus s2 plus s3. So S1 is going down, S2 is coming up, S3 is coming up, but always the total was 5 because mass was being conserved. S1, all of S, if S1 was any S1 that left was all being converted to S2, and the S2 that left was all being converted to S3, and S3 was not being dissolved into nothing. So the total was always 5. So that's what
I mean,
an
I can,
assignment rule is.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'll add to why you'd want to use these. Assignment rules are really
Yeah.
good. Assignment rules are really good for doing um, extra little calculations you want done. Like in this case, he wanted to monitor the total concentration of S1, S2, and S3. They're useful for doing sort of ancillary calculations that are sort of separate from the model. Here's another one. Let's say your model had hydrogen ions, the concentration of hydrogen ions. Let's say you're modeling a transporter in the stomach lining, and it involved transporting hydrogen ions. What you actually wanted to look at was the pH. You didn't really care about the hydrogen ion concentration, but that's what the model was using. So you could use an assignment rule to compute the pH alongside the uh, hydrogen ion concentration. So when you did the plot, let's say you wanted to do a plot, you don't want to plot the hydrogen ion concentration. You actually wanted to plot the pH. So you could use an assignment rule to convert the hydrogen ion concentration into a pH.
Yeah,
That's what they're
exactly.
useful for. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So,
Well,
and the final thing
good.
is like, what is the rate
Yeah.
rule? The rate rule is the rate. This is a rate rule of x, and it is dxdt. So it is the how the species x changes in time. So that's the basics.
Okay. Okay. Let's go on
Herbert,
to one. Yeah, let's go on to the next one.
let's
What's up?
stop just for a moment. Let me end the recording because I'm segregating the section.